do in general, like working with people,
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic when you think about people that are in leadership. Oftentimes, people that are leaders are personally shy. We find that in acting. Sometimes people who are actors or on stage or movies, whatever, are personally reserved. Stage is a place where they can be somebody they're not. People are surprised, students sometimes are surprised to hear from me that I am an introvert. I'm not a gregarious person. I'm not a person that, just loves to go around talking with people and stuff. If I'm in a room with people, if I walk into a room, I pretty much just stay by myself unless there's somebody that I have a conversation with. Because you think that because if someone is talking all the time in front of people that they are outgoing. But Washington was not. He was a shy kind of person. Okay, what else?
Yeah, on the first page, I was just confused, like, because in like one of the middle paragraphs, it was talking about like how slaves and Native Americans like had no legal rights and like they couldn't like move up in the system, but like in the Declaration of Independence, like they're talking about like how they believe all men are equal and like stuff like that. So like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's one of the seeming contradictions that we have. When Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, he makes the statement, all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And yet Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. So does he think that the slaves are created equal and have rights? He doesn't really address that. Now, he didn't like slavery, and Washington, we're going to see, is going to be conflicted about slavery as well, and begin to see those contradictions. But that is something that presents a problem for us today, looking back and saying, how can you say all men are created equal and yet you have people that are enslaved? Yeah, that's a real issue. Thomas Jefferson made a statement concerning slavery once that I think reflects some of the attitude of those that maybe believed in their hearts that slavery was wrong and yet had slaves. He called it holding a wolf by the ears. Now you can imagine if a wolf is trying to tear your throat out and you've got him by the ears. Jefferson said, you don't want to have that wolf, but you don't dare let go either. And he compared that to slavery. So, I don't want slavery, but I don't dare let go either, because the result would be chaos. And he didn't know what would happen. What would happen to all these people that were dependent on being on his farm, in his employ? Where would they go? What would they do? Would there be a large-scale rebellion? No one could say for sure what would happen. So it was very difficult for many of them. They were conflicted, to say the least. All right, as you consider George Washington, we want to look at geographically what we have in mind here in thinking about Washington. This is a map of the United States at the time in 1790. And I'll see if I can bring up a map that might be similar on the slide, so maybe everybody can see it better. We want to identify a few places, and so who's a good geographer? Who knows their geography? Who knows where places are? Who do you think knows where places are? Who do you want to come up and show us where places are? Who do you nominate? Point to somebody. All right, Devin, come on up. And take a look over there at the map, and we'll give you a pointer. Yeah, the map over there. I intended to pull one up here too, but I did not. find it.
Dude, you guys are idiots. It's not Spanish Florida, it's just Florida.
Ah, here we go. All right, so we're going to be looking at George Washington, the forging of a nation. Okay, here's a map. Maybe we can see a little bit better. So the first place we want to find is the site of the Constitutional Convention. Where was the Constitutional Convention held? We can tell him, and then he can find it for us. Where was it, Sally? Philadelphia. You can find Philadelphia. All right, good. Where was Washington's permanent home?
Virginia. Mount Vernon.
Mount Vernon. We find Mount Vernon.
Okay, well.
Well, that's a pretty big area.
Somewhere. State of Virginia.
Look on the other map. I think it's noted there, and then you can tell us where it is over here. First of all, okay, while he's looking, how many of you have been to Philadelphia? Oh, quite a few of you. All right, how many of you have been to Mount Vernon? Everybody who went to Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. Okay, so Mount Vernon is right in that area, okay? It's in Virginia on the Potomac River, so it's near the border. All right, and then where was the first capital? In what city was the capital and the nation began under the Constitution? What do you think, Sally? New York City. All right, find New York City. All right, now, if you notice there is a scale indicator down here. It's kind of hard to see. And part of it's missing. The bottom part telling us what it is. All right, so on this map over here, there's a scale. So we'll use that one. When you're using a scale, have you used a scale to measure distances on a map before?
Yes.
I assume you have. All right. So sometimes it's easier just to use a piece of paper and kind of mark on the scale. So you can use this, Devin, and we're going to ask some distances here between these places. Now, the first place we wanted you to measure is the distance from Mount Vernon to Philadelphia. All right, so while you're doing that, we're going to talk about traveling. How did people travel overland in 1790? Horses, like horseback? Is that what you mean? Riding horseback? What else? Carriages? Wagons? What? By foot? Maybe boat. If we're talking about going overland, there might be some places where you would take a boat. Stephen?
Do trains exist?
No, not in 1790. Now, which would be quicker, going by land or by water? By water. You can go faster on water in a boat than you can by foot or with a horse. Now, how long do you think it would take for news to reach Mount Vernon from Philadelphia? And the reason we're asking this is because the Constitutional Convention was taking place in Philadelphia. The voting for the Constitution was being done in Philadelphia, and Washington was in Mount Vernon waiting to hear the news as to whether the Constitution had been ratified. All right, so how long would it take for the news to get to Washington, do you think? Okay, can you tell us how far it is from Philadelphia?
The straight shot is like 140 miles.
Okay, and the reason that Devin said a straight shot is what? Why did you put it that way, Joey?
It's probably going to be obstacles in the way, like trees.
Yeah, it's not going to be a straight shot, is it?
Yeah.
Even today, with all of our highways, it's unusual that you have a straight shot anywhere, unless it's somewhere close by, right? I only live, what is it, about 12 miles away, or 15 miles away, but it's not a straight shot So it takes me 20, 25 minutes to get here because I have to go some back roads and to wind around. So it's not a straight shot, but if it was, it's how many miles again?
140.
140. So you can probably surmise an additional number of miles onto that. So how long do you think it would take for news to get from Philadelphia to Mount Vernon? If it was urgent, how long do you think it might take?
5 days.
5 days?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Now, how far is it from here to Pittsburgh or here to Cleveland? Anybody know approximately how many miles? 90 miles
Something like that.
to Pittsburgh?
Yeah, Pittsburgh.
Let's see what it is to Cleveland.
Whoa.
How far is it from here to Cleveland?
The drive from your location to Cleveland is 86.5 miles.
That's only, that's 86 miles to Cleveland. How long would it take you on horseback to go from here to Cleveland? Maybe even further. Let's say where else could we go that's further than that? How far is it from here to Erie, Pennsylvania?
The drive from your location to Erie is 118.5 miles.
Okay, that's only 118 miles. That might be further than that. So 140 at the minimum, and more than that probably. But how long would it take you on horseback to go to Erie? 2.5 weeks? Okay, you guys are riding slow horses. To get from Philadelphia to Mount Vernon, if it was urgent, and that's a guy riding a horse fast, it would take 36 hours.
Right.
All right, so apparently you're riding a lot faster than what you guys are used to riding if you've ridden horses. All right, so that's still a lot longer than today, right? If something happened in Philadelphia today and you wanted to know about it in Mount Vernon, how long would it take for news to get from Philadelphia to Mount Vernon today?
37 minutes.
Probably not even that long. Instantaneous, wouldn't it? Watch it on TV. It's right there. It's live, right? So quite a difference compared to back then. All right. So 36 hours at an average speed of 6 miles an hour. How long would it take for Washington to travel from New York to Philadelphia in a carriage? So measure New York to Philadelphia. So New York to Philadelphia. Doesn't look like it's all that far. Looks like about the same distance, maybe a little bit closer than Philadelphia to Mount Vernon. I think we've got a real cartographer here. Let's get an exact measurement.
65 miles, 70.
Okay.
And, from New York to Philadelphia? No, it's got to be further than that. Well, maybe you're right. I thought it was further than that, but so 6 miles an hour, which is in a carriage. How long would that take? Let's say, how many miles? Let's say 80, 85 miles. So you're going 6 miles an hour. How would we find out how long it would take? 8 hours? How'd you get that? Okay, speak louder. Remember words.
15.
How do you arrive at how many hours it would be? 80 divided by 6. Okay, and that gives you what? All right, so we're talking one real full day if you don't stop. Now, when we came back from North Carolina after Christmas, we drove about 10 hours. That was with stopping. Of course, the same thing in a carriage. You're not going to just drive through probably. And for me, that was about my limit anymore. When I was younger, I could go a lot further, but you know, Washington wasn't a really young man, so he may have stopped along the way before arriving there. But so we're talking a full day. And today, if it's 85 miles, how quickly could you get there? A couple hours maybe at the most, right? Remember too that at that time there were very few bridges. So if you're going along on a road and you come to water, you either have to swim across, which is actually what Thomas Jefferson had to do on his way to being inaugurated president. He had to swim across on his horse 7 rivers, I think it was. Imagine that, because there were no bridges. Sometimes there were ferries there that would transport a person across, but travel was a little more difficult than today. All right, now as we think about the situation at the time when Washington becomes president, when the Constitution has been enacted, we think of prior to that, the fighting of the War for Independence and the setting up of government. What kind of government did America reject during the war and following the war? What kind of government did they reject as what they would have? Lahana, what do you think? A monarchy, right. Everybody knows what that is, right? A rule by one person, a king. Now, what was the most common form of government of the period? Let's say in Europe and in most places in the world that the founders would have known about. What was the most common form of government? A monarchy. In fact, that was probably about the only thing they knew about experientially in the world at the time. What basic conception of class structure is monarchy rooted? What kind of class structure seems to have an integral part of being a monarchy? What would you call the class structure in that kind of a system? Devin?
Like a pyramid structure.
Okay, what do you mean?
Like the richest people, there are few rich people at the top, with the king, queen, royal people, and there are more poor people at the bottom.
Right. And how do you get into those different classes? Whether you're an upper class or lower class, middle class, how do you get into that? Caleb?
You're born into it.
Right. It's by birth. Now, is such a structure likely to be rigid or flexible? Rigid or flexible? Say it out loud. Yeah, rigid. Now, how would you characterize class structure in the United States today? Would you say the class structure is rigid or flexible in the United States? Flexible? Yeah, how do you know that? Now, you wouldn't know that by listening to the media, because the media tries to portray those who are wealthy as being born into wealth, and they don't work, they don't do anything to get it, and so we should take away from them as much as we can. But what makes you think that our class structure is more flexible? Stephen?
Because you hear these stories about these people who are on the streets and now they're millionaires.
Can you think of any examples of people that started out poor and then became millionaires?
Jobs.
Steve Jobs. Anybody else?
Mark Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg. Musk. So there are lots of examples, aren't there? Do you know that statistics show that when a person is a millionaire and passes that on to his children, that by the second generation they've lost it all. So in the United States, it's not rigid. It's not people hanging on to what they've got or people not being able to get somewhere. It is flexible. People can rise up. All right, but in a society where there's a monarchy, that's usually not the case. And it was not the case in Great Britain. Stephen?
It seems like half of the NBA players stay, or like professional athletes in general, or maybe like a quarter of them were like all homeless at one point. And thanks to their athleticism, they like have a ton of money.
So they grew up in very poor circumstances,
Yeah.
and now they're very wealthy. and what do you know about some professional athletes, at least, that after they are no longer playing,
They go bankrupt.
they go bankrupt because they haven't made good choices with their money. So it comes and then it goes. So it is very flexible in the United States. All right, so thinking about the kind of government then that was set up, what did they choose? What did the officials in our government, or that were helping to run the country during the war, what kind of government did they choose to set up? And what document was it? What kind of government? What was it called? Or does anybody know the document? Steph? Under the Constitution, it was a republic, but what was it before that? During and after the war, what kind of government was it? Or what was the document that governed the United States? Michaela? I know the Declaration of Independence was simply a statement saying we are separating from England, and here's why. That wasn't a means of governing. Alex, what was it?
Declaration of Independence.
No, that just said we have certain rights, basically as Englishmen or as Americans. But what was it that governed the 13 colonies? What was the government? Michaela? The Articles of Confederation. Does that sound familiar? The Articles of Confederation. Now, no, not ready for that yet. The Articles of Confederation indicated that between the different colonies, there was an agreement to band together in what's called a confederation. What is a confederation? Raise your hand if you know, because what I'm getting now is going to determine what we're going to do next. And if anybody knows, I need to know that you know. Sally?
Yeah, it's like an organization with similar views and values.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. My experience in the past has been that most students don't know about the Articles of Confederation like they used to know. So we're going to do a little primer on the Articles of Confederation by watching a video called Articles of Confederation for Dummies. Whoops.
If you write anything on your computer, you need to get grounded.
I write pretty much all day, every day, and gravity makes my writing better.
As a student, I like
of a lot of property owners was that they might
we started pushing at it. Let's see your dad, he's super young. Does that not look like your dad's super young?
Hey guys, welcome to another Confused History Lecture. In this video lecture, we're going to take a look at the essential question, why the Articles of Confederation exist? So let's get to it. The Articles of Confederation were our first constitution. That's right, folks. We had 2 constitutions. We're very much used to hearing the United States Constitution. Well, that puppy was written in 1787. And if you know anything about American history, the year 1776, maybe that rings a bell for you. That's the Revolutionary War and Independence. So for that 11-year period, from 1776 to 1787, the United States was run under the first Constitution.
The Articles of Confederation.
And I'd like to start with kind of like a mantra, something that if you just repeat enough, you probably will get the multiple choice right, but we're obviously going to explain it in depth. And that is, the Articles of Confederation suck because the feds were too weak. The Articles of Confederation suck because the feds were too weak, or the states were too strong. So, in order to understand what that means, we have to understand the word federalism. That's a really big word on the exam in this course. You have to know what federalism is. If you don't know what federalism is come exam time, you probably should play sick. You should probably get like a cold or the flu. Don't go, because you need to know that word. So, federalism is our form of government, as I sneak over here for a second, right? And basically, the concept is that under colonialism, or the colonial era, the United States, the Americans, the colonists, right, really had kind of like a bad view of what government was, because of the abuses that, you know, the King of England and the English government had kind of done to the Americas. It depends on how you look at it, but no taxation without representation, and the denial of some natural rights, consent of the governed, you know, we really didn't like government. So in the analogy that I use when I teach that
Is with Ike and Tina Turner.
Tina Turner being the colonist and Ike being the abusive, you know, kind of king of England, and that eventually what does Tina do? She grows up, right? She reads Common Sense and she decides, I'm out of here. So now that she's out of here, that's 1776, obviously she has to fight her way out of the Revolutionary War, but she has to now form a new government, right? In a sense, she has to kind of date a new guy. So it's that idea in her head about men, you know, that men are abusive or that government is abusive, that makes her come up with a form of federalism. Because you see, folks, Tina now has the power. So rather than handing all of that power over to some, you know, guy that we really don't know well, she's going to, and here we go with the definition, federalism is the division of power between the federal government, that new guy, and then some just for Tina. Tina's going to be the states in this analogy. We do that in one big swoosh. Federalism is the division of power between the feds and the states. So both of our constitutions have had that theory or that action of federalism. Today we have, you know, rather powerful federal government. And, you know, we're not going to give viewpoints here, whether it's good or bad, but throughout American history, the federal government has grown in size. And, you know, the states still retain power, marriage laws and schools and, you know, some of these issues. But the federal government is definitely the authority figure in that relationship under most aspects of what we would consider public policy. So when Tina first gets her hands on the power, she's going to form the Articles of, you said it, didn't you? The Articles of Confederation. She's going to rip it like this. Federalism is the division of power between the feds and the states. So the feds are incredibly weak. And now you know why. Tina doesn't like government. She doesn't really trust, you know, federal central authority. So the colonists, when they write the first, you know, Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution, they're going to delegate, give to the federal government very limited power. And the states, the kind of, you know, are going to be like independent nations in a sense. They're going to have all, not all of the power, but most of the power that today we find in the federal government. So let's take a look at what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Articles of Confederation. A little bit good, a little bit more bad, and a lot of ugly. Let me go see if I can go find that right now. So I found it. I found the good, I found the bad, and I found the ugly. And as we dive into that, let's just get some basic structure down. There is a federal government, you know. We said that federalism is the division of power between there is a little federal government, there's a big state government going on, but there is a federal government, so we need to look at the structure of that federal government. Basically, there is one branch of government. Today we have 3 branches. We have legislative, executive, and judicial. There's only the legislative under the Articles of Confederation. There is a Congress with 13 members. Guess what the 13 members represent? Yeah, they represent the 13 states. Every state, big, small, it doesn't matter, gets an equal voice, gets one vote in that government. So that's what it looks like. So good, bad, and ugly. The good is the law. I can only go over one because really there is only one fundamentally really good law for the United States government passed under the Articles, and that is the Northwest Ordinance 1787. And I'm going to explain why I said it like that in a second. But basically what this law does is it gives the federal government the ability to grow the nation. It is a procedural law that basically sets up a formula for territories to join the United States and become states. So sometimes in class I've said it like the mama can go get pregnant law. Mama can go get pregnant. Northwest Ordinance 1787. And it's kind of a strange vocabulary word that'll pop up in the exam. If you have a lot of facts stuffed in your head, sometimes it's hard to pull that one out. But generally, if you see that word, you say it like I said it, you'll get that pregnancy visualization in your mind. And then maybe the multiple choice will start to kind of pop out. That idea of the United States growing, of the United States being able to eventually, do manifest destiny through Louisiana Purchase and the Mexican War and all that other, stuff that comes later. So from a United States perspective, that's good. If you're a Native American or you're a Mexican, the Northwest Ordinance is probably not a good thing. But let's move on from there. Let's do the bad and the ugly. The bad is the structure itself, kind of the rules of the Articles that really are going to handicap in a sense, the ability of the United States to go forward. So here are just a few of them. Number one, there's no president, right? If the aliens come down from outer space and say, take me to your leader, there is no leader. There's no court system. There's no ability to tax. The federal government had to ask the states for money, and in a sense, the federal government really has an empty wallet. It has a credit card with no credit on it in a sense. There is no army. The army consisted of the national, kind of what today would be the National Guard, but the 13 states had their own military. There's no monetary system, so there's no national money. There's no ability to control interstate commerce, kind of between the states. Rhode Island, I think, had set up basically its own tax system. That if you wanted to sell goods in Rhode Island, you had to pay Rhode Island money to do that from other states. So those are some of the bad structural aspects. In terms of passing laws, remember there were only 13 members in Congress, 13 states. You needed 9 out of 13 to pass a law. So that's what's called a supermajority. It's hard enough to get 51%, to do anything. So to get 9 out of 13 made it very difficult to pass laws, to change the Articles of Confederation. Let's say they had a realization that, oh man, that's messed up, we have to change that. You needed all 13. So that's going to be a problem. And we're going to find out, through the Annapolis Convention, that eventually we're not going to be able to get 13 to agree to change anything, which is going to ultimately destroy the Articles of Confederation. So kind of that's the good and the bad. I'm going to get right, Northwest Ordinance 1787. The inflexibility of the Articles.
The assignment that I have on Ryan Web will hold off.
I think you're good. Remember, yeah.